Hi, welcome to the Politic podcast. I'm Representative Ryan Wilcox, joined here today with Sheriff Ryan Arbon. It's the All Ryan Show.
Thanks, Ryan, for having me.
All right, good to have you here. So, Sheriff, here today, and just for everyone listening, we want to have this conversation in the context of the wrap up from the last legislative session in my role as the Chair of Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice, and of course, Sheriff Arbon here, member of the Utah Sheriff's Association. And in particular, we have some really cool bills this year that affect sheriffs, right? How we carry it out, and frankly, one that we're all going to vote on coming up here. And I think that's scheduled only on the even cycle years when we vote on those constitutional amendments. So that won't be till not this fall, but next fall that the rest of us vote on that. So why don't we start with that one, HJR 10. This one, you may notice, was carried by the Speaker of the House, was the primary sponsor. That is not super common for those of you watching at home, that the Speaker will carry legislation. And when they do that, it's generally something fairly heavy, and not necessarily that it's going to be a big fight, but fairly significant in what we're working on, right, in long-term effect. And so I'll let you talk about what that is, since you're speaking also not just to your constituents, but Utahns in general, those that are watching. Why do you think it's important that we pass HJR 10?
Well, I think it's an awesome thing, and I just want to express my appreciation to Speaker Wilson and also President Adams for that. This is a good thing for the state of Utah and the residents. And this is, the sheriff is the only elected law enforcement position in Utah, and particularly each county. And also what this does is this is a position that's by the people and of the people, and they get to choose who's going to be their sheriff. Unlike cities where the chiefs, it's usually picked by a mayor and then supported by a council, a few people.
Yeah.
But this is what makes it, and it's going to be in the Constitution, the state of Constitution. So this is a great deal. This is awesome. I'm just thrilled that this is going to happen.
So yeah, and I probably should have explained a little bit more about what the basic part of this is, but in that statement right there, you recognize that we have different forms of government. And that's fine with our different political subdivisions, and that's important. There needs to be some different accountability there, and our sheriffs are the only elected law enforcement.
It's true.
In the state of Utah, right? That's pretty common across the country. That you'd have an elected sheriff. There are some places where you don't. And we've seen consequences, particularly through the last 3 years, of what happens when law enforcement becomes too politicized.
Yes.
Right? And I've heard, a lot of conversations, sort of the subtext to these about, well, aren't sheriffs politicized? They're up for election.
Yeah, they are. For me, personally, Ryan, it's known within the office that the politics is handled by me.
Yeah.
But the sheriff's office is strictly business, law enforcement business.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think we need to be afraid of that. That's part of my point by asking that question, right? Yes, there are politics involved. You are up for election. But that's the important part, is that the people of that county get to decide that directly. It's not a hey, mother, may I on an appointment. It's not law enforcement professional, and I'm not going to use any names here, but we've had that exact scenario in the last 3 years where a law enforcement professional will tell us directly, meaning the committee and those who are responsible for it on the Hill for the policy side, I wanted to do X, but I was prevented to by my mayor.
Yes.
Right? Like, I knew that was the wrong thing to do, but I wasn't allowed to do that because I'm accountable to that person.
Well, Ryan, you remember that bill that we worked on? Was it House Bill 53 or 52 from a couple years ago, that if you were arrested during a riot, you had to see a magistrate?
Yeah.
Well, that came on the heels of myself and a few of my staff went to Portland and did a tour.
Yep.
And we learned very quickly that the chief of police in Portland was not in charge.
Yep.
And he was directed not to enforce certain laws, and it really upset the residents of Portland City. I talked firsthand with business owners.
Yeah. And
business owners were so mad that the police were not there to protect their businesses that were being destroyed, because the police were told not to intervene.
Right. It's been helpful for us, frankly, in law enforcement in our area, in some ways, because we've picked up great officers from the Northwest. Right. We've had one of my favorite ride-alongs was with an OPD officer who we picked up from Seattle. Right, just a professional guy, and it came back a lot to this issue. Right, he knew that this community supported law enforcement. He saw how we responded when Officer Lyday was killed. Right, he understood where he wanted to be, and he that he wasn't necessarily appreciated and was prevented from doing again. And this is a very personal thing for a lot of law enforcement officers. Just like elected leadership, we require them to swear that same oath to the Constitution.
True.
And when they take it seriously, right? So when they're prevented from doing that by for political considerations, that rubs them the wrong way, and it should, right? All right, I'm not sure why Siri just went off on my watch, but there you go. Something I said triggered the watch there. That's all right. Anyway, so that's going to be a super important one. Again, that's HJR 10 that we got through. In fact, just about every member of the House co-sponsored the bill, and it had zero opposition as it went through the process. I think everybody saw what we've seen, what we've talked about the last 3 years, and so I hope that our citizens will support that.
They will. I mean, the House and Senate example, this is something that the people want.
Yeah.
And I believe it'll pass easily.
Good. To move on from that, a lot of those situations are some of the most difficult situations that we ask law enforcement to deal with, and one of those are that is a little bit new this year, not new, but changed a little bit in how we're going to approach that, relates to school safety and security. With the creation of the state security chief, his direct coordination and responsibility for each county now lies in your hands, so to help make sure that happens, and really the piece that I think is going to be a significant barometer on how well we do or not is going to be what happens at each sheriff's office, right? On training, they'll be responsible for coordinating the training. They'll be responsible for the design standards implementation. When we talk about not just school construction, but the things that we know are best practices to make sure that they're implemented with all law enforcement agencies in a given county. Can you talk to us a little bit about why you think it's important that it was housed at the county sheriff's office?
Yeah, there's multiple reasons I can think that this is actually a really good bill. Thank you for putting this together. What it does is it centralizes a lot of things and makes sure that we're all on the same page. We're doing the same things. And then, one thing that in our office, and I know other agencies do the same thing, Ryan, is continuous improvements, right? We always want to make something better. Here's a bill that's seen from someone on the outside who thinks outside the box and says, you know what, we can always do better. And most law enforcement, including our office, we can admit that we can always do better, and sometimes we don't see everything. Mm-hmm. And here comes Ryan Wilcox and company and all these great other representatives that we have supporting us in Utah, and they're saying, here's something we can do better on. And it's like, here's some new ideas. And it's like, yes, this can work, and we work together. We already have great relationships with the Weber County School District and its board members, and also Ogden Schools and the police. The police agencies in our county. Mm-hmm. And some of these things that were mentioned in the bill we're kind of already doing. Yeah. But this just is a little bit better. In fact, I think it's a lot better. And by being underneath the sheriff's office, again, it kind of falls back to that elected official that's supported by the people, we the people, and it puts me and my staff and our people held accountable to make sure this is going to get done.
Well, that's part of the hard conversation is that's the important part for us on the state side, is that there hasn't been somebody that's directly accountable for making sure that happened. Right. And so while we're doing, honestly, and I've told a lot of our our citizens this in town halls and all of these things, that I'm very comfortable with our local preparation for the worst case scenario, right? I've watched the trainings happen. I've had conversations with each of our local agencies. I've walked through their safety plans. I've walked through the response plans, all of those things. I'm comfortable with that. That isn't the case across the state.
Right.
So when we're talking about statewide policy, obviously I don't just work for Weber County here on that side. That's fairly uneven, and there are, district to district, city to city, and a lot of the rural communities, for example, have really struggled to try to figure this piece of it out. That, and we have a lot of charter schools. We have a lot of kids in schools that aren't part of a district. So we have a great relationship with Ogden and Weber, and that's great. What does it look like at Da Vinci Academy? What does it look like at Venture Academy?
Right.
How prepared are we with those? Now we will have somebody specifically in the sheriff's office whose responsibility it is to coordinate with each of them to make sure we don't miss anybody. Because that's going to be where our biggest liabilities are, those ones that we missed. So I'm super grateful for the sheriff's office, not just willingness to take this on, but really to take responsibility for it and to make sure that we're not missing anything we shouldn't. I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the trainings. I've talked about that, about what it looks like, but I want to talk to you about the training that your office has been involved in. I know, OPD's taken requests from a lot of educators, frankly. Sheriff's office in Utah County, I know Sheriff Smith's been down there doing training for educators that have asked for it. This is now going to be, instead of a nice idea, if somebody asks for it, it's going to move into required training for every school, right? To make sure that they're as prepared as they can be. So you talk a little bit about how you envision that working and how it's working already.
Well, as you can imagine, when there's a school shooting that gets national news, which they all do, I always get calls.
Yeah.
Sheriff, what are you doing for the schools? And a lot of parents don't know, and a lot of parents do know. And for example, we had that last shooting in Texas last year, and I received a lot of questions about this, and I would tell the parents, this is what we're doing now. And in fact, we already were putting in the plans for a special training, and we contacted Weaver Schools, specifically Lane Finley, and says, here's some ideas. What can we do? Let's work together on what a training that we could do specifically for teachers right here, right now, and that we can continue on in the future. So we did. We have great staff at the sheriff's office, and we put together a class or an instruction period talking about, public safety and standard protocols, response calls in schools in the event that happens. And within a few weeks when school started, we went to Weber High, and we had teachers from all across the valley, our county, come in and attend. And then we hosted another one out at Roy. And we did the same thing. And comments that we received after that is like, we hope this never happens, but thank you.
Yeah.
And we did. We had those, as you referenced earlier, tough conversations. Yeah. This can happen. This is what's going to happen if there is a shooting. Be prepared. And it's not pretty. Yeah. But they are prepared. They learned a lot. They were really appreciated. And then going forward, we're going to continue. Well, we're doing it now. We're still going to continue. We want to make sure the teachers are comfortable and feel safe, and most importantly, our kids. I still have kids in school. Yep. It's a priority for me, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that's safe. If you don't mind, I'm going to add to it. Weber County is already doing some threat assessment of particularly their older schools, because like I went to Weber High, and Weber High, I believe there's like 50 doors. That are all outside.
You mentioned Weber High, and I'm immediately thinking of all the liabilities there.
Yeah, and some time ago, they went in there and they assessed it and they determined which doors, right? And so there's already securing the facilities that were built where this wasn't even conceived or an issue years ago. And I'm just so thankful for Weber County School District and their leaders taking on this initiative to do this. And this all fits in within that plan, is that we continually improve our processes and education for the safety of our kids and teachers.
Well, and that's one of you mentioned a couple of the really important parts of 61 that we hadn't talked about, and that's one is that it requires now, instead of a may, it's a shall complete a threat assessment for every single school. that'll be your guys that are helping to make sure that happens, right? There'll be a threat assessment for every school, and then we talked about communication. You mentioned the standard response protocol. That also was another bill that was part of this package, that to make sure that when we're communicating, every agency is speaking the same language.
Yeah.
And that the schools understand what that language means, that we don't have different definitions of lockdown and lockout and all the different things that happen.
Yes.
And then really the parents down to the kids, and even with the kids, it's developmentally appropriate for them, right? But that they understand that language too.
Well, the benefit to this too is by this bill that you put together and got passes, is if you have and this is just an example, you have a teacher that's with Ogden Schools, and let's say for some reason they transfer to Weaver.
Which happens all the time.
It should be the same thing,
Yep,
right?
that's
they
right.
move in there, they've already been taught, everything's unified, it's simple, should be simple and easy to understand. So if there is a situation on day one when they're hired to the new school,
Yeah.
they're not getting confused with the different languages. It's all the same.
And the reality is, we have officers that live, that serve in Davis County and Salt Lake that all live in our community.
They do.
Right? If they're the closest responder, they need to be able to respond and integrate immediately.
Yes.
Right? And understand, just flip on the radio, the communications piece. There are so many angles to this thing, and we could spend the entire time talking about this one. But the communications piece, I think, is going to be like a long-term and underrated part of the conversation that we talked about just a little bit, but that probably has a more impactful long-term horizon. And that is, a lot of our buildings, not only were they not built with, these scenarios in mind, but communications in Weber High School, for example, getting out of the radios and some of those almost impossible down some of those hallways, right, and some of those wings of the school. So those pieces that are going to require and provide the funding, and not just a little bit, this is significant funding.
That's like
for
$75 million.
$75 million just in grants.
Huge.
Right. Yeah. Significant funding to make available, whether it's repeaters, to make sure that when you go into those schools, we can actually communicate with you. You're not left on your own.
Yeah.
Right. Those seconds, those minuscule changes matter.
They matter. Every second counts.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm excited that you're going to be helping out with that, and we'll see what that looks like. We've got the task force starting up here shortly that'll make final recommendations this fall. So we'll have a follow-up next session that we'll be able to talk about. But
looking forward to it.
But that brings us to our next part of the conversation, and maybe what we'll do is we'll take a break real quick. Again, this is Ryan Wilcox with Politic here with Sheriff Ryan Arbon, the Ryan Caucus today, talking law enforcement changes from this last legislative session. We'll be back in a moment. Thank you. All right, welcome back to Politic. Representative Ryan Wilcox with Sheriff Ryan Arbon, the Ryan Law Enforcement Caucus here. We've been talking about a couple of really cool things. So the constitutional elevation of the election of county sheriffs, we're excited about, and of course into school safety and security. As I thought about that conversation, the echo in my mind is the quote from Scripture. If ye are prepared, ye shall not fear. Right. And you mentioned that a minute ago when we talked. Thank you for the training. We don't want to have to do this stuff. We don't want to have to do this. And at the end of the day, we really just want our kids to be able to go to school without thinking about any of it. Right? I don't want teachers worried about this stuff. I don't want administrators thinking that they've got to, carry and that they're the last line of defense. Right? Frankly, it's our responsibility. Right? As the state, as
the education,
security and safety experts in the community. So we're going to do everything we can to take that off their plate, help them to be prepared so that they're not worried about it, and let those kids worry about getting their reading scores up by the third grade. Right? Let them worry about all of the things that they need to be worried about at that age. And so there's a lot to come. We have a lot more to do, but we're excited to partner with you on that. But that, again, leads us to the conversation about the things that we do ask law enforcement to do, which a lot of times it's not just helping us out on our worst days, but it's the worst possible scenarios that you don't want to know about, in the community, but that are very real. And every once in a while, those are the things that touch us, but they're the things that touch law enforcement every day. Right? And so we're talking about first responder mental health. What does that look like? What's the long-term toll on our first responders when they deal with those things? And gratefully, we've had a little bit of a cultural shift in understanding not just the importance of of dealing with mental health issues. We've seen the fallout from when we don't in our society. But we also understand, I think, to a greater degree than I've ever seen in law enforcement, in our military communities, that traditionally haven't embraced that, how important it is for them to be on their game, right? We can't afford to be off in those scenarios when we have those worst case scenarios, and making sure we're not just physically fit, but that we're mentally at our best too is a super important part of that. And so we made the big changes last year with that program. This year we made a couple of important ones after talking with a number of retired first responders. And one of those was that instead of starting that clock when they retire immediately, automatically, that clock starts, that 3-year clock when they have access to those services, starts when they're ready for it. We had a lot of conversations with some of our guys who it's been 7 years. And I'm thinking of one in particular, 7 years, exactly. Yeah. Right? And, 10 years and 12 years later, when they finally realize that, I'm carrying around stuff that doesn't belong to me from, traumas from years ago. And how important it is when they're ready to do that, that they're able to do that. And so we're hoping that that'll make a difference there. We also included spouses of retirees. And,
Awesome.
Yeah, families, we included spouses, and we really intended to do this in the original legislation last year, but we didn't specifically spell it out with as it came to retirees. And, I got an email from one of our retired spouses. She was also herself a first responder. She was one of our dispatchers, right? And her husband is now retired. And speaking as a spouse to her of the things that the family carried on his behalf with him over the years, she was just so grateful that this was even a consideration, because she can point to just as many of her friends who are your wife's friends, sure, right, in law enforcement who have spent your entire career supporting you and buoying you up, dealing with all of those things, because let's be honest, like that's your first mental health therapy. It's your family.
It's true,
right? Like that's your support. So it's been fun to talk to those folks about what that looks like. I don't know if you want to share anything about that or.
Well, I do actually. I often get asked why, and this all depends. This is not every single officer, or deputy, anybody in law enforcement, but it does pertain to many of them. But I always get the question of why do my neighbor who's a police officer, why is he quiet? Why does he not come to church? Or why does he not come to certain activities and participate? And so trying to understand that question, I just want to be careful. I'm not, saying this is every situation, every cop, but there's times in my career where I just don't want to associate. And when again, depending on the jurisdiction you're in or the community, you deal with the worst of people when they're on their worst every day. Yeah. Every call, it's that person, that's their worst.
Yep.
And you don't get to see their best, the community's best. And then, every family in this world has their own problems. Every individual has their own challenges they have to deal with. And then they go to work and they're dealing with the worst situation possible. And it's a heavy burden. And in law enforcement, we're taught to be strong, to be valiant, to have courage, and to fight the good fight and protect the innocent and protect the victim and go after the criminal and all this kind of stuff. And there's a high expectation. We're human. Some of us have a higher threshold than others, and some give it their best and they come up a little short, but they need this kind of assistance. And sometimes it's not right away. You mentioned earlier about 7 years ago, right? Yeah. And I know a lot of friends who have had situations that have happened a few years ago, and they're just fine, like nothing's happened, it doesn't bother them. But you see personality start to change. They start to withdraw from their friends in the agency. They're not wanting to promote. They're not wanting to do certain things or take on assignment. And it just slowly creeps in. And then, you have spousal, or you're struggling with one of your kids. there's just a pile on. And what you're doing and what this is doing, this is such great help. We appreciate it all across law. Thank you, Ryan, for thinking of those that protect you and protect all of us. So this is going to help significantly. We really appreciate it.
I hope so. I've had a lot of those conversations with spouses, right, as this has come up. It wasn't just the one email. And some of those conversations are a little bit heartbreaking.
They are.
And they're conversations that a few of them have asked me not to share with, not to mention to their spouse who's in law enforcement. Right?
Yeah.
And because they don't want to be a further, they don't want them to worry about them.
That's right.
Right? So
that's interesting. I'm going to share something a little personal.
Yeah.
But in my career, I didn't notice this, but my wife, sometimes I'd come home, she would look at me and she'd say, "Did you have a good day?" And that was a code, if you will, of she sees something on my face, right? Yeah. Or my coming in. And I think it was when I started noticing that question, I started thinking, uh-oh, I'm affecting my family.
Yeah.
Because I do depend on them. You know, when my kids were really little, they loved when dad or daddy come home, the hugs. And then once they got those teenage years, that stopped, you know, that enthusiasm. But that was kind of my support. It still is. My family's wonderful, and they support me any way they can. But it does affect the home. And the spouses, boy, and this is what makes this even greater, that this helps the spouses.
Yeah. You mentioned something there that I think is important for our audience to hear. And that is that those that love us, and this is across the board. This is not just law enforcement. This is not. I had a day at work when I dealt the night before with a suicidal gentleman. And I just ran into at the hospital, and I'd stayed with him all night. I got him the help he needed, all those things. And I'm not a therapist. I can't save you from anything. I'm not a medical person, right? I just happen to do policy there. But the next day, I'm walking around, and my boss could see it on me. I told him I was fine. I told him the story.
Sure.
Like, it was great.
Everything's fine.
And he's like, "You want to go talk to our," like, we have a hospital. Every hospital has a therapist on staff, like for emergency department, for, you know, because we recognize, like, same thing. Those guys have to be on their game. They, like, when you come in with your heart attack or whatever it is you got, they got to be ready to go. So, and that the therapist had a break at lunch, and so I went in and talked to him, and had no idea I was carrying around all that guy's angst from the night before, all the things that he
happens,
dude. that wasn't anything like what our law enforcement officers deal with. And so when they see that, and that's when you see that in your officers, you mentioned that a little bit ago, right? You can see that there's some changes there. It's just so important that you have that friend, and in my case, my former boss, right, that looked at me and said, "You know, why don't you go talk to a therapist at lunch?" I'm like, "What?" I thought he was crazy at first, right? I don't need that. It was fine. I was totally fine. I wasn't feeling suicidal or anything. I was just like, whatever. But until I sat down with him and unpacked all the stuff that I was carrying around and felt that load lift, that's when I realized, oh, that's what this is, right? And it was affecting me. So I appreciate your insight there. And I guess the invitation then, and this is obviously wider than the law enforcement conversation. Like, if and when you recognize that in your loved ones and those around you, don't wait. Don't wait.
Don't wait.
It's not like law enforcement are the only funerals we've been to with suicides, right? Or first responders. There have been way too many. All of us have been touched by that. So don't wait. Talk to them directly and help them get the help they need right then. I didn't expect this to go there, but that's super important for all of us to remember. And that leads to the next thing I wanted to talk about. We have a dramatic shortage of mental health therapists in Utah.
We do.
And it's somewhat across the country. My responsibility has been with the first responder space, and so I've looked at specifically the needs there. In that space, we're about 30% of what we need for qualified therapists. I don't know why Siri is just on one today, but apologies for that. But anyway, we got about 30% of what we need. And so as we were trying to figure out what to do about that, one of the things we recognize is that we have our peer support teams, and we have our critical incident stress management team that goes around in Utah that really act as the first line of defense for our first responders after critical incidents. They're the ones that do the debrief with them. They're the ones that help. They're hopefully being that friend that says, hey, do you need to talk to somebody? Like now, after that kid that you just pulled out of the accident that you're never going to forget the rest of your life, that looks exactly the same age as your own child, right? All of those people. As I talked to them, we had some conversations about, how we could translate that experience into a solution. And what that really sounded like to me is, a lot of our law enforcement friends retire about my age, right?
They do.
They are. We lost Neely here just just a bit ago, and I've had a number of other friends retire, which is a little bit strange to me. But part of that because I'm going to be working for a long time in that space. But what this provides is a unique opportunity with people that understand not just what law enforcement goes through, but all first responders in a way that I won't ever, because I haven't carried that burden. But they always will, and they've been through a lot of those scenarios. And so for those that feel called to do it, we created a scholarship program that will allow them, including during their time when they know they're going to wrap up this part of their career, they're ready to transition, and they feel called to help their brothers and sisters in blue and red, that they can then choose that as an option, and they can be part of that solution. And so I'm thrilled that just got through. In fact, it just got signed by the governor yesterday. So that one's done, right? We don't have to wait for another one.
We have I'm sure you've heard this, we have an amazing group of officers that don't have those professional education skills that you're talking about, but it's peer support.
Yeah. And
this is the group that has either been through it and knows about those tough situations, and they kind of come together and they're that support because for many of us, it's hard to go see a professional counselor. Well, who's this guy or who's this?
Yeah.
Why am I going to talk to them? They don't know me, but you have a brotherhood that's formed in our ranks and in all of our agencies, and there's those guys that everybody trusts because they can keep it confidential. They know where you've been. They've had several years of working with this individual, and they can have that conversation.
Yeah.
And these are the same peer support group is the same group that wants to learn more, wants to be a better advocate, wants to have, but to get that education and have the finances to find time to do it. And these are the ones I could see as getting their career done and then hopping in, getting their degree, and coming right back.
Yep.
And just saying, here, I'm here, I can help. Right, let's do it. This is awesome.
Yeah, Sheriff, I've had that conversation a number of times now in the last several months. Right, one of those our Major Stevenson, our former director of Post. I had that conversation with him in December, and one of the coolest legislative moments of my life was the day that he called me up and said he wanted to testify to this in committee. It was the day it was going to the House committee, and he said, "Remember that day when you looked at me and you said, I need the Major Stevensons of the world to look at this, and if this is what they feel called to do, then they need to become part of the solution." He started the mental health therapy program like 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
He's
Awesome.
like, you remember that day when you looked at me and said that? Anyway, and he goes, that was it. He goes, I knew it as soon as you said that's what I needed to do. And I know that there are those guys that you're thinking of, right? That have been through this stuff. They're already looking at what that needs to be like for that next phase of their career, and I hope they will see this. I hope they'll understand that this bill is there for them, that this opportunity exists, that they can help make that transition because we need them.
Yeah, there's an Officer Evans, who works with OPD.
Yeah,
he's been in the business for probably at least 30 years, I think.
Yeah,
I tell you what, that guy is just amazing with peer support.
Yeah.
And I could see him taking full advantage of this, and we need more people like Stevens and more people like Evans get in this and help out. Awesome. Yeah.
Well, they can just, like I'm saying, they can understand and help in a way that the rest of us can't. Any other randomly trained therapist, and we still need those too.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Well, that one, we had a couple of scholarship bills for law enforcement. That was the smaller of the two. The much larger one was Senate Bill 128. Senator Ibsen started that one in the Senate, and that one is addressing our hiring issue in general. And it's unique in is that it's targeted to high school students, which I think is pretty cool. I don't know that we've had anything like that in the past.
Well, part of the struggle with high school is you got to have some kind of a cadet program or something because they can't get in law enforcement until on the road until they're 21. Mm-hmm. But it was a bill that's passed, I believe, last year that they can go to the jail at age 19.
Right.
And we've seen some great success from that. But how do we get them in sooner? We at the sheriff's office we have something a position called corrections assistant. It does a lot of task-oriented computer and data entry stuff. We can get them in at the age of 18, but if we can get them sooner than this bill is targeting, I think we'll see success from this.
Well, I think the important part from this one is not just that they are thinking about a law enforcement career sooner. When they're making those decisions about school, right? If they decide that's what I want to do, this is helping them to get their degree. We, more educated, not just through post and your regular training, but also a bachelor's degree in law enforcement is an option, right? And this is, again, much more significant investment in this particular scholarship and a prize across the board to the state, and I'm hoping that will.
Yeah, I hope so too. Chief Gwynn of Pleasant View is also a representative. Posted something on Facebook the other day and talked about we're struggling to get people into the profession, and so right now there's this wage war. We're picking from each agency. I got 8 people coming to me from one agency, and some of my guys leaving to another agency. It's becoming a lot about wages. It's a lot about opportunities, a number of things. But we're not getting the people coming in, and I think this should help bridge that gap because we've got to get good people that want to make a difference to come into law enforcement. They are key to public safety. We need more. We need good people. Yeah, this is great.
So we're excited about that one. There's a handful of other bills too, and we've probably spent enough time today. But an early intervention system, law enforcement, and this has been one of my favorite things to sort of discover. I mean, I've always sort of known this, but to watch law enforcement not just balk at changes that need to be made, right? So we all know we all make mistakes. We all know that, our regular lives, right? Like we don't go a day and I don't think to myself, okay, I should have handled that differently or better, or a given conversation or whatever it is. And to have law enforcement openly acknowledge those issues in our committee process and on the Hill, and one of those is reflected in the bill that Senator Escamilla ran, Senate Bill 124, right, that I got to carry in the House. And that one, it basically makes chiefs and even leadership, which is important, accountable to post where they haven't been in the past, and they should. And having those conversations with the chiefs and the sheriffs and about what needed to happen. Where I frankly expected more pushback. I was surprised I didn't have more pushback on that, and was thrilled that, everybody's like, yeah, that actually should be the standard. It was just refreshing and wonderful for me to experience. And that's not just this time. This has been consistent over the past 3 years in this role. We had 80 anti-cop bills, I think, my first year that were categorized as anti-law enforcement that, most of those, of course, we kill. But even then, I was surprised at the number of those where there was a lot of self-reflection, like, we can improve our process here and our accountability here. And that makes sense. So when it does, we were talking about continuous improvement in the break here. They didn't see that, but that's actually super important too.
It is,
right? That we do that, not just in the private sector, we do, but that, and maybe you want to end with that a little bit of a conversation about why you feel like acknowledging where we can improve is so important as it relates to law enforcement.
Well, it is. I believe when we were, I remember talking earlier, we talked about the schools and the training and how we can improve security. but in every bit of our lives, personal lives, our physical abilities, our spiritual abilities, our work duties, where we work, I believe we have a responsibility to improve things.
Yeah.
There's I have this question that I ask the new trainees. I say, how many times have you asked in your FTO, your training experience, have you asked somebody why we do something? And what are your responses? And some of them will say, well, that's just the way we do things.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, really? But they do answer. But most of the time they say, well, this is the process, this is the reason why we do it. But if we get to a point where we just do it just because, or that's the way it's always been, then it's those, and then I get concerned about getting stagnant or going cold or not improving. It's the term of, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, yeah, but if it ain't broke, how can we make it better?
Yeah.
Right? I've learned some terms in my career about standards and raising the standards, and there's a term they call chalk it. So you raise the bar and then you chalk it. So that's the limit, right? We do not go worse than this, but we go better. And if we improve, we chalk it again. And you want to continuously improve. We owe it to ourselves and everybody to be better.
Yeah.
Continually improve and make progress.
Yeah.
In anything we do. So
I think we'd probably want to, as the sheriff's office wraps up this tranche work, I think it's going to be fun to have you back and see what changed.
Yeah.
But even the initial conversations about, we saved $26,000 because we changed, how we're delivering mail in the office.
Yeah, we looked at our mail process, and it takes a long time. I mean, we have any given time 700 to 900 inmates in both of our facilities, right? Yeah. And they have mail. Yeah. And so people think, well, how hard is it to go just put a mail in a box? Yeah. And it's not that simple, because if we deliver, like on the delivery mail, some mail, a lot of it's legal. So then you take a mail clerk and they go into one of our sections in a pod, they have to be escorted with a deputy for security. Mm-hmm. And so you think, oh, okay, now it makes sense. There's so much more involved. Yeah. And it's just so complex, and it would take our staff up to 3 hours to pick up and deliver mail. Yeah. And that includes the administration and other offices, and you think, okay, that may be right. Yeah. But we've implemented some processes and done some gauges and learned how and we've cut that drastically, and it'd be cool to show that, to save. Yeah.
Well, just as a citizen of the county, I just thank you for doing that work. Yeah. That isn't super common in that space, and yet it's super important. And I'm hoping that the county in general, this becomes a cultural thing.
Sure, it
right?
should.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I have to say this, and please, this is sincere and from the heart. The law enforcement community, we love Ryan Wilcox. We think you're doing what's right, not because for show, but you're doing what's right for the law enforcement community. You care about the citizens. Your priority is public safety. I think every single elected official's first priority should be public safety, and you are an example of that. We see it in your work, we see it in your attitude. You don't just say nice things and do good things, but you actually come out and you do ride-alongs. You come to the meetings, you attend. That's just wonderful. You're a great example, and thank you sincerely. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sheriff. Well, awkward moment for me, but genuinely I do appreciate our county sheriff and our law enforcement partners here, and that's really what they are, because they are who we call on our worst days. And it's important that we work with them to all of us to hopefully continually improve our community. Again, thank you to Kevin here for keeping us going, keeping the lights on. And again, this is Representative Ryan Wilcox with Politic podcast with Sheriff Ryan Arbon. Thank you.